My mother-in-law arranged a dinner at an exclusive restaurant. But when I arrived, there was no seat reserved for me. She smirked. Maybe a budget place suits you better. I burst out laughing and asked the owner for a seat, because the owner was. The maitre d' barely glanced at me before shaking his head. I'm sorry, madam, but there's no reservation under your name. I blinked, momentarily thrown off. That's impossible. I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here. He gave me a polite but firm smile. I just checked. There's a reservation for 6 under Morgan Sinclair, but I'm afraid a sharp, familiar voice cut through the conversation. Oh, Claire. Morgan's voice rang out, dripping with amusement. Did you really think I'd include you in tonight's dinner? I turned to see my mother-in-law standing just a few feet away, dressed in her usual designer ensemble, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled. Seated behind her, my husband Adam sat stiffly, his gaze darting between us, clearly uncomfortable but saying nothing. Beside him, his sisters, Charlotte and Emma, whispered to each other, smirking. I felt my stomach twist, but I refused to let it show. I don't understand, I said, my voice calm. Morgan's smile widened. Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd actually come. She chuckled as if I had done something amusing. This is a family dinner. A place like this is, well, it's a bit out of your league. Don't you think? Maybe a budget restaurant suits you better. Charlotte snickered behind her wineglass. Emma avoided my gaze. Adam, he just sat there gripping his fork, silent. I felt the weight of humiliation settle in, the judgment in the air thick enough to choke on. Other guests were beginning to notice, their curious glances flicking toward the unfolding drama. I should have seen this coming. For years, Morgan had made it abundantly clear that I was never good enough for her son. I didn't come from old money like she did. I didn't attend prestigious schools. I wasn't born into their privileged world. From the moment Adam and I got engaged, Morgan had gone out of her way to remind me that I didn't belong. At first, it was subtle. The passive-aggressive comments about my simple tastes, the way she would conveniently forget to invite me to family events, the expensive gifts she would buy for Adam while giving me nothing but empty smiles. But tonight, she had taken things to a whole new level. She had planned this. She had arranged for my husband's family to have a luxurious dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, ensuring I would be left standing at the entrance like an unwanted outsider. And she was enjoying every second of it. The humiliation should have burned. I should have felt small. But instead, something inside me clicked. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made Morgan's expression falter for just a second. Then, without a word, I turned to the maitre d'. Would you be so kind as to ask the owner to come out? I asked, my voice smooth and confident. Morgan let out a laugh. Oh, please. Do you really think the owner of this place is going to come out here just because you asked? I turned back to her and met her gaze evenly. Yes, because the owner of this restaurant, he knew me very well. And in a few moments, my dear mother-in-law was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Morgan's smirk didn't waver, but I could see it, the slightest flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had spent years treating me like an outsider. But tonight, she had escalated her little game into outright humiliation. And she had done it in front of my husband, his sisters, and a restaurant full of people. The air around us felt thick, heavy with anticipation as I stood my ground, refusing to let her win. The maitre d' hesitated, clearly unsure whether to humor my request. But before he could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. Claire? I turned just as Daniel Laurent, the owner of this exclusive establishment, stepped into view. A man in his early 50s, Daniel was the definition of refined elegance. Salt and pepper hair, a tailored suit, and the kind of confidence that came with owning one of the most sought-after restaurants in the city. Morgan's eyes widened slightly as she registered the way he looked at me, not with dismissal, but with genuine warmth. Daniel, I greeted, my smile widening. It's been a while. His gaze flickered over to Morgan, then to Adam and his sisters before settling back on me. It has. What brings you here tonight? I gestured toward the table where my in-laws sat, their expressions shifting from amusement to something far more uncertain. Apparently, I wasn't included in the reservation, I said lightly. A bit of an oversight, wouldn't you say? Daniel's eyes darkened slightly, catching the unspoken subtext in my words. Then just as quickly, a polite smile curved his lips. That won't do at all. Morgan scoffed, crossing her arms. Oh, please. Do you really think this restaurant can just find a seat for her? This is a private dining establishment. You don't just walk in and expect a table. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Sinclair, he said smoothly. This restaurant does not accept last-minute walk-ins. I felt a pang of disappointment, but before I could respond, he turned toward the maitre d'. But Claire is not a walk-in. She is family. The entire table froze. Charlotte's glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Emma's eyes darted between me and Daniel in shock. And Adam? His grip tightened on his silverware, but still he said nothing. Morgan, however, wasn't one to back down easily. She let out a disbelieving laugh. Family? Oh, this is rich. You must be mistaken. Claire is my son's wife, and I assure you she has no connections to actually. I interrupted smoothly. Daniel and I go way back. Morgan narrowed her eyes. How? I leaned forward slightly, my voice just loud enough for those at the nearby tables to overhear. Before I married Adam, I used to work in fine dining. And Daniel? He was my mentor. A stunned silence settled over the table. Morgan opened her mouth, likely to protest, but Daniel cut her off with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Claire isn't just some former employee, he said calmly. She trained under me when she was fresh out of culinary school. I personally taught her everything she knows about hospitality and high-end service. She was one of the best students I ever had. Morgan's jaw tightened. This was not going how she had planned. I could see the realization settling in, the fact that despite all of her efforts to belittle me, I had a past she knew nothing about. A past that now undermined her entire stunt, and I wasn't finished. I turned to the maitre d', still standing awkwardly at his podium. I assume Daniel's word is good enough to find me a seat? The maitre d' immediately straightened. Of course, Miss Claire. I'll have the staff prepare a table right away. Morgan's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. This is ridiculous, she hissed under her breath. You're telling me she gets special treatment just because she used to work for you? Daniel chuckled. No. She gets special treatment because she earned it. The maitre d' signaled for a waiter who hurried over and began setting a place at their table, right next to Adam. Oh, I mused, feigning surprise. Looks like there's actually plenty of room after all. Morgan's fingers curled into fists against the tablecloth. This is absurd. I leaned in just slightly, lowering my voice so that only she could hear. What's absurd is that you thought you could humiliate me and get away with it. Her nostrils flared. You're being dramatic. I shrugged. I'm just enjoying dinner with my family. Isn't that what you wanted? Before she could snap back, Daniel patted my shoulder. I'll have the chef send over something special for you, Claire. Morgan nearly choked. Something special? Daniel smiled. On the house, of course. Morgan was seething now, but there was nothing she could do. Adam, still silent, reached for his drink. But I caught the flicker of something in his expression. Was it relief? Embarrassment? Shame? I wasn't sure. But what I did know was that this dinner had just begun. And Morgan Sinclair? She was going to regret ever thinking I could be dismissed so easily. The waiter placed a freshly polished silver plate in front of me, followed by an elegant amuse-bouche. Something delicate, artfully arranged and entirely complimentary, courtesy of Daniel. Morgan's expression, pure unfiltered rage. Oh, I murmured, picking up my fork and slicing through the dish with practiced ease. This looks incredible. I took a bite, savoring it. Not just the taste, but the deliciously tense silence that followed. Across the table, Charlotte and Emma exchanged wary glances. Adam still hadn't said a word, choosing instead to stare at his wine glass as if it held the answers to his problems. Morgan, however, wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She took a slow sip of her own wine before placing the glass down with a little too much force. Well, she said, forcing a tight smile, I suppose it's only natural that someone like you would know people in hospitality. I arched a brow. Hospitality? Morgan waved a hand, feigning politeness. You know, service industries, waiting tables, kitchen work, not exactly the kind of careers we're accustomed to in this family. Ah, there it was. The real reason she had orchestrated this entire charade. It wasn't just about excluding me from dinner, It was about reminding me in front of everyone that in her eyes, I was still just a woman who had worked her way up from nothing. I took another sip of wine before responding. You say that like it's a bad thing. Morgan's eyes flickered with something, annoyance, maybe even a bit of surprise. She had expected me to be rattled, but I wasn't. Not anymore. I simply meant, she continued, that it must have been quite an adjustment for you, marrying into a family like ours. Her tone was light, but the words dripped with condescension. And Adam still said nothing. I turned my gaze to him, studying the way he refused to meet my eyes, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about his mother's cruelty, this was about his silence. Because this wasn't the first time Morgan had tried to humiliate me. It had happened at our wedding when she conveniently forgot to invite my side of the family to the rehearsal dinner. It had happened at Christmas when she gifted me a cookbook titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife in front of an entire room of people. It had happened last summer when she made a snide remark about how fortunate I was that Adam had taken a chance on me. And every single time, Adam had let it slide. And I had told myself it wasn't worth fighting over, that I didn't want to be the cause of conflict. But this was different. This wasn't just a passive-aggressive comment. This was an orchestrated attempt to humiliate me in public. And he had let it happen. I set my wine glass down, the movement slow, deliberate. Then I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. Morgan, I said, my voice smooth even. Do you know what the difference is between you and me? She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes despite herself. I smiled. I worked for everything I have. A sharp, stunned silence fell over the table. Morgan's face hardened. Excuse me? I didn't blink. You heard me? I felt Charlotte stiffen beside her mother. Emma pressed her lips together as if suppressing a laugh. Morgan scoffed. Are you trying to imply that I haven't worked for what I have? I let the question hang in the air. And then, before she could formulate another condescending response, I added, I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career from the ground up. And yet, I gestured at the table. Here we are, sitting at the same restaurant, eating the same food with the same level of respect from the owner. Morgan's fingers curled around her napkin, knuckles white. Charlotte and Emma weren't laughing anymore. And Adam? He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. For the first time since I had met Morgan, I saw something flicker across her face, something she usually hid too well. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Because she had spent years trying to convince herself that I didn't belong, that I was lesser, that I was just some gold digger who had latched onto her son. But now she was starting to realize the truth. And the truth was that I was not someone she could break. I picked up my fork, casually cutting into my dish again. Oh, and Morgan? She exhaled sharply through her nose, clearly furious that I had stolen control of the conversation. What? I smiled, slow and deliberate. You should be careful about who you look down on. I speared a bite of food and placed it in my mouth, chewing slowly before adding, you never know who might end up above you. The tension at the table was suffocating. Morgan, usually poised and in complete control, sat stone-faced. Her fingers curled so tightly around her wine glass that I half expected it to shatter. Adam looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Charlotte and Emma were stealing glances at each other, clearly wondering if they should intervene. And me? I had never felt more certain of my place. I could see it in Morgan's expression, the way her carefully curated mask of superiority had cracked, even if just for a moment. She wasn't used to being challenged. She had built her power on people bending to her will, on people being too afraid or too polite to put her in her place. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Morgan took a slow breath, composing herself before placing her glass down with a soft but deliberate click. I see, she said finally, her voice deceptively smooth. I suppose I should commend you, Claire. You've managed to elevate yourself beyond your circumstances. I took another sip of my wine, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. But tell me, she continued, her lips curving into a saccharine smile. If you're so independent, so self-made, why is it that my son is the one paying for your lifestyle? I paused. Charlotte let out a quiet gasp. Emma shifted uncomfortably. And Adam? Adam flinched. Morgan's smile sharpened. She could feel the eyes of the table on me now, waiting for a response. I set my glass down, my movements slow and deliberate. What do you mean by that? I asked, feigning confusion. Morgan leaned forward, dropping her voice to a mocking whisper. I mean, darling, that my son is the reason you can afford that lovely little boutique job of yours, isn't he? You don't actually need to work, yet you play pretend at having a career. How charming. She tilted her head, her smug smile returning. You talk about self-sufficiency, but at the end of the day, you're still just someone my son supports. And there it was, her final card, the insult meant to humiliate me beyond recovery. The final blow to put me back in my place. I let the words settle, taking in the way Adam still refused to look at me, the way his sisters held their breath, waiting for me to crumble. And then I laughed. Not a small embarrassed chuckle, a full genuine laugh. Morgan's smirk faltered. I'm sorry, is something funny? I placed my napkin back onto the table, still chuckling. I just realized how truly out of touch you are, Morgan. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I gestured toward Adam, my voice calm and deliberate. You think he supports me? I asked, arching a brow. That's adorable. Charlotte made a choking sound. Emma's lips parted in shock. And Adam? Adam went pale. Morgan's smile dropped instantly. What are you talking about? I sighed, almost pitying her. You still see Adam as your little boy, don't you? The one in control, the provider. The man who rescued me from my lowly life. I tilted my head. But let me tell you something, Morgan. That's not how this marriage works. Morgan stiffened. You want to know what's funny? I continued. Adam's business, his investment projects, half of them were funded with my money. A stunned silence fell over the table. Morgan's eyes widened, her entire world shifting in real time. What? She whispered. I smiled, but this time, there was no warmth in it. Adam didn't build his career alone. I continued, still speaking to her, but keeping my gaze locked on my husband. When he wanted to start investing, he didn't have the capital. I picked up my wineglass again, but I did. Morgan's fingers twitched. That's not possible. I shrugged. Believe what you want. But the reality is, your son's success is built on my investments, my strategies, and my support. Charlotte and Emma looked at Adam for confirmation. But Adam, still silent, still frozen in place. I shook my head. You think you can humiliate me by painting me as some dependent little housewife? That's laughable. Because the truth, Morgan, Adam needs me far more than I need him. Morgan's face turned a deep shade of red. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You spent all these years trying to make me feel like I don't belong, but I've been the one keeping this marriage, and, by extension, your precious family name afloat. Emma looked like she was about to pass out. Charlotte? Completely speechless. And Adam? Adam finally opened his mouth. Claire? He croaked. Maybe we should. I held up a hand, cutting him off. No, Adam, I said, my voice firm. You don't get to maybe we should be right now. Not after you sat here in silence while your mother tried to humiliate me. Morgan looked at him now, realizing for the first time that her son, her golden boy, was completely spineless. And suddenly, she didn't look as proud of him anymore. For the first time she looked at him like he was small, like he was beneath her expectations, like he had failed her. A delicious role reversal. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. I think I'm done here. Morgan's nostrils flared. You can't just... I turned to Daniel, who had been watching from a polite distance. Daniel, it was lovely seeing you. Thank you for the hospitality. Daniel nodded, amused. Always a pleasure, Claire. Then I looked at Adam. You coming? He hesitated, staring at me, then at his mother. And in that moment, I knew. I knew exactly what he was going to do, because Adam had never chosen me before, and he wasn't about to start now. Morgan smiled triumphant. And I? I smiled right back, because what she didn't know was I had already made my choice too. And soon, she was going to regret ever trying to put me in my place, because I was about to show her and Adam exactly how powerful I really was. Adam didn't follow me. I hadn't expected him to. As I stepped outside the restaurant, the cool night air brushed against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was sharp, clear. This dinner had been a long overdue wake-up call, a moment of truth that had been years in the making, and now it was time to act. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I typed a message. Me, we're moving forward. Initiate the process first thing tomorrow. Within seconds, the response came. Attorney, understood. You'll have the first draft of the divorce settlement by noon. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. Divorce. The word didn't scare me. What scared me was how long I had ignored the truth, that Adam had never been on my side, that for years I had been alone in my own marriage but not anymore. Tonight had been the final push I needed. And Morgan? She had no idea just how thoroughly I was about to upend the life she had worked so hard to control. I arrived home before Adam, which gave me just enough time to do what needed to be done. First, I walked into the home office, the one that Adam used for his investments, and I opened the safe. The passcode? He had never changed it. A mistake. Inside were all the financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, business agreements, and the one I was most interested in, the contract that tied his most lucrative investment to my initial funding. I picked it up, scanning the familiar legal jargon. This was the document that proved I was the financial backbone of his entire empire. Morgan thought her son was the great businessman of the family. But without me, he was nothing. I took a quick photo of the contract, then placed it back exactly where I found it. There was no need to take it, not when I already had what I needed. Next, I went to the bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase and began packing. Not in anger, not in haste, but in absolute clarity. This wasn't an emotional decision. This was a calculated departure. By the time Adam walked through the front door, I was sitting on the couch, suitcase by my side, waiting. He paused in the doorway, staring at me like he wasn't sure if he had come home to the right house. Claire? I tilted my head. Took you long enough. His eyes darted to the suitcase, his breath catching. What are you doing? I stood up, calm and controlled. Leaving. Adam's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. You made your choice, Adam, I said smoothly. Back there at the restaurant, when your mother humiliated me again, and you just sat there. His jaw tensed. I was trying to keep the peace. I laughed. Peace? Adam? Your mother planned this entire dinner to embarrass me. She booked a table and left me off the reservation on purpose. She insulted me. She tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. I stepped closer, watching him shrink slightly under my gaze. And you let her, just like you always do. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly flustered. It's complicated, Claire. You know how she is. I let out a breath. No, Adam. It's simple. You're weak? His eyes snapped to mine, offended, but it was the truth. You've spent our entire marriage letting your mother dictate how you treat me. I was patient, Adam. I gave you so many chances. But tonight? I shook my head. Tonight, I finally saw you for what you are. Adam swallowed hard. Claire, let's just talk about this. I sighed. That's the problem, Adam. There's nothing left to talk about. I picked up my suitcase and brushed past him. And then, just as I reached the door, I'll fight you on this. I turned. What? Adam's face had darkened, his voice low. If you think you're walking away from this marriage with half of everything, you're mistaken. I stared at him for a moment before smiling. Oh, Adam, I said softly. You really should read your own contracts more carefully. Confusion flickered across his face. What? I cut him off. You wouldn't even have half of what you own if it weren't for me. You use my money to build your investments. And guess what? I let the moment hang. I have all the paperwork to prove it. His face drained of color. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I let you borrow my money, Adam. I let you build something with it. But now, I smiled. Now I want it back. Adam staggered back a step, the reality hitting him all at once. He thought he could threaten me? He had no idea who he was dealing with. Adam stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale, his jaw clenched. I could see the exact moment the realization hit him, that I wasn't just leaving him, I was taking everything he thought he controlled. He opened his mouth, probably to argue, to beg, to try and manipulate me like he always had, but I didn't give him the chance. I'll be staying at the penthouse, I said, adjusting the strap of my bag over my shoulder. His brows furrowed. What penthouse? I smiled, tilting my head slightly. Oh, Adam. The one you think you own. I watched as confusion turned into horror. The downtown penthouse? He asked, voice uneven. The one I bought under my name? Yes, I said smoothly. I had my lawyer review the ownership documents earlier today. It was never yours, Adam. His nostrils flared. You wouldn't? I already did. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the counter. He hesitated before opening it, his eyes skimming over the legal document inside. His hands shook. This, he swallowed. This says you own 51% of my investment firm. I nodded. Correct? His breathing turned shallow. That's impossible. I shrugged. Not really. I was the initial investor. Remember? I never transferred ownership over to you. You just assumed I did because, well, you never actually read the contracts, did you? I watched as panic took over his features, his mind racing, probably wondering how the hell he had let this happen. Claire, he said, voice tight. You can't just take this from me. I smiled. I'm not taking anything. I already own it. He staggered back, gripping the counter. This was the man who had let his mother humiliate me, who had sat there in cowardly silence while she tried to strip me of my dignity. Now he was the one powerless. I don't understand, he muttered. Why? Why are you doing this? And for the first time in years, I felt completely undeniably free. Because, Adam, I said, I finally see my worth. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house for the last time. A month later, I sat in the penthouse, legs crossed, a glass of champagne in my hand. Across from me, my attorney smiled as she slid the finalized divorce papers toward me. It's official. You're free. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers over the thick paper. Free. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. The legal battle? Short and brutal. Adam had tried to fight, of course. He had stormed into meetings, demanded a better deal, threatened to take me to court. But the moment my lawyers laid out the documents proving I was the true majority shareholder in his firm, his arrogance had collapsed. Morgan had tried to intervene. She had called me furious, accusing me of being a gold-digging snake. I had simply responded, if you raised him better, this wouldn't have happened. And then, I blocked her number because Morgan Sinclair was no longer my problem. I lifted the champagne glass to my lips, savoring the moment. And then, as if the universe wanted to gift me one last laugh, my phone buzzed. Adam, can we talk? I smirked, setting the glass down and typing back. Me. About what? A pause. Then, Adam. I don't know what to do. I exhaled, shaking my head. It was sad, really. For years I had waited for Adam to show up for me, to be the man I thought I married. I had waited for him to stand up to his mother, to fight for me the way I had fought for him. But now I saw him for exactly what he was, a man who had spent his life hiding behind the power of others, too weak to build anything on his own. And the irony? He needed me now more than ever. But I didn't need him at all. I typed one final message. Me. That's not my problem anymore. Then I blocked his number too. Because for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, and that was the most powerful thing I had ever done.